Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This is Jeremy McFarlin for the Sports History Network and for the Football is Family podcast. One of the best things about hosting a football sports podcast is the fact that I get to read a book about a topic, a person, or an event, and then get to talk to that author about the book that he or she wrote. Today's episode is no different. Today, we talk to John Eisenberg, who has written several books about different aspects of sports history. Today's episode focuses mainly on his book, The League, How Five Rivals Created the NFL and Launched a Sports Empire. I have included a link in the show notes to his personal webpage where you can purchase this book and the other books that he has written. And while you're at it, head over to the Sports History Network website at the link also provided in the show notes. We have so many great podcasts available. We have great men and women who are working diligently to make this your single stop for the sports yesteryear. Make sure you subscribe to each and every one of them and give them a rating. You can follow the Football is Family podcast on Twitter at Jeremy_McFarlin or on the Football is Family Facebook page. And we're back to Football is Family, and I've got a special guest that I've been looking forward to ever since I had the chance to read his book, The League. I'll let him introduce himself. Will you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm John Eisenberg. I'm a sports writer for many years in Baltimore and the author of 10 books now, several on pro football history.
Yeah, and I was looking through some of them, and the first season, a book about Vince Lombardi, I'm looking forward to reading that. And I have gone through this, and I haven't picked it up yet, but I will now. 10-Gallon War, the book about the Cowboys and the Texans, the Dallas Texans. And I didn't realize just how deep that battle was between the NFL and the AFL until I did a little bit more research. So that's not right now, though. The one I want to talk about today is the book, The League, How Five Rivals Created the NFL and Launched a Sports Empire. You brought some stuff up in this book that I don't think I've ever heard about. Or maybe if I did, I didn't really think about it. The NFL was not a moneymaker at the very beginning.
No, and that's really why I wound up writing this book and taking this approach. I actually I have a literary agent in New York, and he's well connected, and he was approached by an editor an editor at Basic Books, a publisher in New York, and the editor said, "Hey, I want to do a book on early days of pro football." And my agent said, "Okay," and the editor said, "Do you have a writer?" And my agent said, "Yeah, I have one." So that was me, and I got in touch with this editor, and he said, "I want to do a book on early football." I said, "Great." And then he said, "So tell me what the story is." And that threw me a little bit. I haven't had that. It was like it was up to me. Okay, what is the story here? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized what the story was. I mean, books have been written about Red Grange and a lot of the great football players, Bronco Nagurski from that era. I thought that ground had been covered. But what had not been covered really was, as you pointed out, the NFL in the first years was basically a failure. It was a failure for a number of years. And so how did we get from there, where teams are folding and there's no money on the table, to where we are now, which is $15 billion in annual revenues or whatever it is? So I set out to tell that story and focused on the owners who really carried the league through those early years when it was a failing enterprise, pretty much. How did they sort of turn it around, save it in those tough years, and then turn it around and set it in the right direction? That's the story.
You did, and I like how you weave the book together. You dealt with five people, and I don't think I'm giving away the book if I mention these people: Tim Mara, George Hallis, George Preston Marshall, Art Rooney, and Burt Bell. And you basically gave them their own chapters, but you weaved them together in a beautiful way. And I was very impressed with how you would take one topic and you would talk about him. He said, well, these guys are still here over here, and they're all working together to move the NFL. One of the stories that I enjoyed, I guess I shouldn't have enjoyed it because I know it wasn't good for them, but I guess it worked out, is how George Halas had to finagle a lot of people to keep his team going.
Oh boy, did he ever have to finagle? Yes, I mean the real point in NFL history. I mean the 1920s. The league was started in 1920. The first decade, it was franchises coming and going and weird scheduling and no playoffs, and they were just sort of making it up as they went along. And it was just a sort of a nothing enterprise. And then where it really struggled and barely made it was once the Depression hit, and stock market crashed, and there was just no money, no fans, anything. How they keep going? So George Halas, that was probably the most amazing thing I found out in my research for this book. But there was a year where it came to an end, and he told players, Red Grange and Bronco Nagurski, some of the most famous players in NFL history, he gave them IOUs instead of salary because they didn't have the money to give them. And it was Halas's grandson who told me this story, who now runs the Bears, George McCaskey. And he said, the amazing part about that story is they took the IOUs. These guys said, okay, all right, we think, and they came back to play. And it's like, well, okay, maybe this guy in the long run is going to figure it out. It was a real show of faith. And so, but he, it was the difference between making it and not making it at one point was like the money he was getting from the ads and the program. And it wasn't a lot of money. There was just no money on the table. And Halas was just scrimping and saving everything he could to get through. He didn't come from, he was working class roots. Mm-hmm. Some of these other guys were a little richer. He was not. So he was really working hard to keep it going.
Well, what got me is he was borrowing from his children's college fund.
Yes, and his daughter told me that story.
I think she's okay now.
Yeah, she's doing all right. The Bears said Virginia McCaskey, Halas's daughter. She's 90. She's in her mid 90s. I think she owns the Chicago Bears. They're worth $3 billion or whatever it is. So that several thousand that she gave her dad out of her college fund, I think worked out okay.
It did. Tim Mara, I didn't realize, and I'm glad you brought that up. He made a lot of money from horses.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Horse racing was very big in the 20s and much more popular than pro football, more popular than just about anything except Major League Baseball, probably. He was a bookie. I mean, can you imagine today? Of course, it's all changed now. The NFL is embracing gambling, but for many, many years, they were worried about that. But Tim Mara, he was a legal bookmaker in New York City. This is the years before where you go to the racetrack, before it was all computerized. We're really, getting into horse racing history here, but it used to be you'd walk in and everybody had a bookie. There was a row of them, and you would put your money with a guy and bet odds. He did that at the New York tracks and did it very well and made a lot of money. And they were kind of celebrities. It was in the newspapers and everything. And
now, did Art
big? I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, he was big into that, and it funded a very nice lifestyle for him.
Well, did Art Rooney have something to do with that as well?
Well, Art Rooney was a gambler, flat out gambler. The guy that started the Pittsburgh Steelers was probably one of the best horse players in the history of the United States. Many years later, when the Steelers were good and he was an old man winning Super Bowls, people they'd show the camera on him. He had a cigar and it was kind of cute. And he was a very genial sportsman. But back in the day, that guy could make money at the betting window. He never worked a day in his life. He if he really needed money, he would go to the racetrack and was really, really good at it. And all this stuff was in the newspapers. You could find it. You research it. There was one summer he was making so much money that he was a celebrity. They were writing about it. People would cheer him. He was walking to the betting window. This little guy with a cigar waddling up to the betting window. But he was really, really good at it. And so there was a lot of sort of gambling and horse playing in the early days of the NFL.
Well, I don't know if they would if that would go over well today, but it did then. Did you get to talk to any of the Rooneys?
Yes, I did. I spoke actually to the late Dan Rooney before he passed away. I went to their training camp one day and had a nice visit with him and Art Jr., who's still alive and is a key figure in the history of the team more after the years that I'm writing about. I mean, he became a scout, and he was a tremendous scout. When the Steelers started winning Super Bowls with a lot of those African-American players, and a lot of them from small colleges or historically black colleges, Art Rooney Jr. did a lot of the scouting. And it's an amazing story in itself. But he's a great raconteur, and so I did speak to both those Rooneys.
That's just hearing the names come up. It's one of the guys that I didn't know about was George Marshall. I don't know if you'll have to read the stories to see. He wasn't the best person you'll ever meet in your life, but I didn't realize he made his money off of laundromats.
Yeah, well, not laundromats so much as it would be the 1920s version of dry cleaning. You know, people would take in, and it was all over Washington. He had a chain of them. You bring in your clothes, and of course, Washington was a government town then, as it is now, and so there's a lot of people living in apartments, and they needed somewhere to get their clothes cleaned, and he just found a niche. And he made a lot of money in that business. And no, he was not the greatest guy ever. He's probably the biggest racist in the history of the NFL. I mean, they went 12 years without having an African-American player in the league, from 34 to 40 through 45. And that was probably his doing for the most part. He was very influential. And, he didn't integrate the Redskins until the 1960s.
Oh,
so an amazing figure. However, also, I mean, every day I wrote this book, I thanked whomever, the literary gods, for George Marshall as a character, because he's fascinating. Because not only that's the bad side of him, the good side of him was he was hugely influential in the history of the league in terms of making it more interesting, exciting product, the forward pass, playoffs. He basically invented the playoffs.
Yes.
Did all sorts of things. So just a tremendous figure, really, really interesting guy.
Now, one of the stories, I want to see if I can get the names right. I think it was Hallis and Marshall ended up getting almost into a fight in the middle of the field one time. Is that the two I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
And that Hallis's wife was getting on to Marshall, and he said, "Don't talk to him don't talk about him that way. He's my best friend."
He's my best friend, and they'd almost just gotten in a fight. I love that story. It was during the 1937 championship game. Just a crazy story. There was the roughest guy on the field was playing without a helmet, still doing that, 1937, and he slammed into some guy in the sidelines, and they started a brawl, and benches emptied, and that's Hallis and Marshall end up jaw to jaw. Their teams are playing. This is a championship game. They're playing for the championship. And ultimately, we're separated, and cooler heads prevailed, as they always say. But they were best friends. And to me, that story really illustrates the nut of what I was trying to get to, which was these guys were rivals on the field. They fought each other for championships. They would try to screw each other any way they could. However, they were partners too. They were business partners in the business of pro football, and they understood that mattered more than anything. If they weren't partners, this whole thing was going to go down. So they made many, many decisions along the way that not in the heat of the moment, not on the field during a championship game. They made many decisions that were for the greater good instead of their own best interest. And that is really the way that they grew the sport from the failure of the 1920s into the success that it became.
Now, and I get you for a couple more minutes, Mr. John. Thank you for your time today. One of the stories that I really enjoyed from your book is how the Bears actually saved the Giants, and it was with I believe it was with Red Grange.
Oh, well, yes, you're going back to the 1920s there.
Yes.
Yeah. The first year of the New York Giants, Tim Mara started them. He bought them for $500 and started him. He didn't really know anything about football, wasn't even that interested in it, but he started it, he thought, well, maybe my kids will like it or something. And they were running out of money and didn't have a lot of fans, and pro football was barely making it. And then Red Grange, who was the most famous player in that era, he turned pro after his final year at Illinois, fall of 1925, and the Bears signed him. And they went on a barnstorming tour, very, very famous. They just went around the country. They realized that there was a hunger to see Red Grange. And so they went around the country playing teams, other teams, selling a lot of tickets. And, it sort of introduced pro football really to America. And when they came to New York, 70,000 people showed up to watch him at Yankee Stadium. So 70,000 people was twice as many as they'd had for every game, total for the season. Just suddenly, and they made a lot of money, and that allowed the Giants to continue. And so, it was a real stroke of genius by the Bears and Hallis to get Grange under contract and then go around the country with him and show everybody what pro football was all about.
Can you imagine what it would have been like in the NFL without the Giants?
Oh my goodness. The Giants, I'm a fan, and I've been a sports writer many years and a fan. And this was the first time I really dug into the early history of the NFL. And I was fascinated by it. The impact of the Giants, as you said, just tremendous. They were like the first team to draw fans, like 1930. Suddenly people are coming to see the New York Giants in a baseball town, New York.
Yes.
And so, they're just hugely important in the history of the league. And all these teams are, the Bears also, goes without saying, they were there for the origin of the league, the only ones. And so, those two teams really, really carried it through the first two decades.
Now, I always, the Steelers, their name they were not the Steelers at the very beginning.
Right.
The Eagles were not the Eagles from the very beginning. I think it's funny hearing how George Hallis rationalized naming his team the Bears. I just thought that was funny where, they played in Wrigley Field.
Yeah.
And they played with the Cubs. Well, football players are bigger than baseball players, so we need to be the Bears. I just think that's funny. That's it's amazing how simple stories are. It doesn't have to be complicated. One last thing, and then I'll let you go, my friend. And again, appreciate your time. Bert Bell came from a wealthy family, but lost everything through gambling and everything like that. He bought the Eagles, or he founded the Eagles, I should say. Yep. How did they get the name the Eagles? I want to hear people to hear this story.
Oh gosh, you're testing me a little bit, but he was walking down the street. And they had just gotten the franchise. He's walking down the street in Philadelphia, and he saw, it was a Depression era a billboard. He saw a billboard that said, the economic, I can't remember the exact name of the federal program.
Yes.
That it was the economic recovery, not unlike what's going on now. But it was, they were in a depression. The federal economic, I don't know the name of the program, but there was a bald eagle on it because it was the federal government. And he saw this sign and he said, he's walking down Center City, Philadelphia. And he said, oh, the Eagles, that looks good. Eagles, let's call them the Eagles. Nothing more than that. So, and he borrowed his wife's money it was his wife's money that started the team. So these guys, they were real characters.
They were. And this book, how can we get a hold of this book, The League?
Well, it's everywhere. It's certainly on Amazon, anywhere. It's a major publisher, wide distribution. I've sold a ton of them on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com or Books A Million or wherever you normally get books. They can get it for you. It's out there.
You have several books like 10-Gallon War, that first season, and Cotton Bowl Days, which I'm also interested in looking. Then you have the one that when we get off of recording, I want to talk to you about, The Streak. Since you are in Baltimore, you have, I'm sure you have a lot to do with Cal Ripken there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I worked for the Baltimore Sun for 23 years. I wrote a lot more baseball than football back in the day. Right. And I was there for all Ripken's. That's the story of his consecutive game streak. So that just came out a few years ago.
Like I said, I'll talk to you just a second after we get through recording. and you have some books over racing, horse racing. So you are definitely into a lot of different sports, and I appreciate your time. And if anybody wants to follow you on Twitter, how can they follow you?
Yeah, it's at B More Eisenberg, at B More Eisenberg. And all my stuff, I'm still writing daily sports columns. You can find me, Baltimore Ravens digital channels, ravens.com.
Oh, you're hurting me.
App or whatever.
Oh, you're hurting me. I didn't know if you were going to bring up the Ravens. You're hurting me.
I see your Titans hat.
Yeah. It's still a little sore. It's still.
Well, what goes around comes around, right? So.
He just went there. Oh yeah. But the big thing is I didn't dance on your logo, mainly because I can't dance. My wife tells me to quit.
I don't get into that stuff.
Well, thank you, Mr. John. I appreciate your time.
Sure, it was my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation and enjoyed being with you.
All right.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.